You're standing on the trading floor of the seventh largest company in America. It's the year 2000, and the energy is electric. Phones ringing, screens flashing green. Somebody just closed a deal worth more money than most people see in a lifetime. And nobody blinks, because here, that's Tuesday. The stock sits at $90.75 a share. Fortune magazine has just called this company America's most innovative for the sixth year running. Employees are told over and over that they work somewhere special, somewhere untouchable. That company is Enron. Here's the question that should stop you cold. In less than 16 months, this company won't just lose value, it will disappear. Billions of dollars gone. Thousands of jobs gone. Retirement accounts people spent 30 years building wiped to zero in weeks. How does that happen? Not to a struggling startup, not to some fly-by-night operation nobody trusted, to the seventh biggest company in the country, a business that employed 20,000 people and reported over $100 billion in revenue. The answer isn't a single crime. It's not one bad decision made in a dark room. It's a fiction, built piece by piece, that thousands of smart people either believed or chose not to question. This is how they built it, and this is how it fell apart. Rewind to 1985. Two unremarkable gas pipeline companies, Houston Natural Gas and Internorth, merge into one. The new company takes the name Enron. Nobody outside Houston is paying much attention yet. Kenneth Lay runs the show. He's the chairman, the face, the man with the vision. But the real transformation starts when he brings in a young consultant named Jeffrey Skilling. Skilling doesn't want Enron to just move gas through pipes. He wants Enron to trade it, to treat energy contracts the way Wall Street treats stocks and bonds. You have to understand what this meant at the time. Trading energy like a financial product was new, risky. Nobody else in the industry was doing it at this scale, not even close. But it worked, and it worked fast. Enron built a trading desk that quickly became the middleman for a huge share of the energy deals in the country, taking a fee on nearly everything that moved through it, from natural gas contracts to eventually broadband and water. The money followed. So did the reputation. Fortune magazine started calling Enron America's most innovative company, and kept calling it that year after year, 6 years straight. Harvard Business School wrote glowing case studies about it. Top graduates from the best MBA programs in the country competed hard for a spot on Enron's trading floor. Because working there wasn't just a job. It was a signal that you were smart, sharp, aggressive enough to be trusted with real money and real risk. Enron reported over $100 billion in revenue and climbed to 7th on the Fortune 500 list. On paper, it looked completely unstoppable, the envy of every boardroom in the country. But paper, as you're about to see, was exactly the problem. Here's what that problem actually looked like, in plain terms. Normal companies record profit when money actually arrives. You sell a product, cash comes in, you book it as revenue. Simple. But Skilling pushed Enron to adopt something called mark-to-market accounting. And once you understand it, everything else about this story starts to make sense. Under mark-to-market rules, if Enron signed a 20-year contract to sell natural gas to some utility company, it didn't wait 20 years to record the profit. It estimated, right then, how much that whole contract would eventually be worth over its full lifetime, and booked that estimated profit immediately, as if the cash were already sitting safely in the bank. Think carefully about what that actually allows. Your income statement isn't reporting what actually happened last quarter anymore. It's reporting a guess about the future, dressed up as a fact about the present. And guesses can be generous, especially when your bonus depends on how generous they are. This wasn't illegal on its own. Regulators had approved mark-to-market for certain financial instruments, and other companies used versions of it too. But Enron applied it far more aggressively than almost anyone, across deals that were much harder to value accurately. Broadband capacity, water contracts, weather derivatives, assets with no established market price at all. So when a deal underperformed later, when the gas didn't sell for what the model predicted, Enron didn't have to immediately admit the loss. It had already booked the win. Now it just needed the real numbers to somehow catch up to the imaginary ones. That gap between the profit on paper and the profit in reality kept growing and growing. Someone had to find a place to hide it. That someone was already there, on the payroll. Meet Andrew Fastow, Enron's chief financial officer, the man Skilling trusted to make the growing gap between imaginary profit and real profit simply disappear from view. Fastow's solution was something called a special purpose entity, or SPE. An SPE is a separate legal partnership, technically independent from the parent company, that can hold assets or debt off the parent's balance sheet. Used carefully in small doses, it's a normal accounting tool. Plenty of legitimate companies use them. Fastow did not use them carefully or in small doses. He built entities with names like LJM and the Raptors and used them as dumping grounds. When one of Enron's investments started losing value, Enron would essentially sell it into one of these partnerships at whatever price made Enron's books look healthy. The loss vanished from Enron's balance sheet. It just moved sideways into an entity that outsiders couldn't easily see into. Here's the detail that should make your stomach turn a little. For these entities to count as independent under the accounting rules, they needed real outside investors putting up real outside money. Fastow often solved that requirement by running the entities himself or arranging for Enron's own stock to secretly back them. The independent investor and the company doing the hiding were, in practice, the same company. And Fastow personally collected tens of millions of dollars in fees for managing it. By the year 2000, Enron had created more than 3,000 of these special purpose entities. Scattered across its books like landmines, nobody outside a small circle could map. 3,000. Not 3,000 transactions. 3,000 separate legal structures, each one a place where a real number could quietly become a smaller, friendlier number or disappear entirely. To the public, to shareholders, to most of Enron's own board of directors, the balance sheet looked clean. Underneath it, a second set of books was doing all the real work, and one person decided she couldn't stay quiet about it. Sharon Watkins was a vice president of corporate development at Enron. In the summer of 2001, she started digging quietly into some of Fastow's partnerships. And what she found frightened her enough to write a memo, 7 pages long, sent directly to Kenneth Lay. Her warning was blunt. Enron, she wrote, might implode in a wave of accounting scandals. Think carefully about the position she was in. She wasn't an outsider guessing. She worked there. She'd personally seen enough of the internal mechanics to know the foundation wasn't solid. And she put her own name on a document saying so, directly to the chairman, months before the rest of the world had any idea. Now here's the moment that shows you exactly how wide the gap had become between what leadership knew and what leadership said out loud. In late September of 2001, weeks after receiving that memo, Kenneth Lay held a company-wide forum with employees. He told them the company was fundamentally sound. He called the stock, at its now declining price, incredibly cheap. He encouraged them to buy more. Meanwhile, he had in his own hands a written warning from inside his own leadership team that the entire structure might be about to collapse. You can decide for yourself how much of that gap was deception and how much was denial. Historians and prosecutors have argued over exactly what Lay understood and when. But the pattern is the pattern. One person quietly raising the alarm, and the company publicly insisting everything was fine. It wasn't going to stay quiet for much longer. October 16, 2001. This is the exact date the story stops being contained. Enron announces a third-quarter loss of $618 million. Alongside it, the company discloses something even more alarming, a $1.2 billion reduction in shareholder equity, tied directly to the unwinding of Fastow's partnerships. For the first time, the public gets a real, hard number attached to the mess that had been quietly building for years. You'd think a company this size could easily absorb one bad quarter. Plenty of large companies do, every year. But this wasn't read as a routine bad quarter. It was read as a crack in a wall that everyone had assumed was solid concrete. And once analysts started looking closer at the underlying numbers, They didn't like what they found underneath. 6 days later, on October 22nd, Enron confirms the Securities and Exchange Commission opened an inquiry into its accounting. Within another week, that inquiry becomes a full formal investigation. Fastow is fired, and with him gone, there's no one left inside the company still trying to hold the structure together. Here's where the story picks up speed. Enron admits it needs to restate years of past earnings. Credit rating agencies, the ones whose job is to warn investors exactly like you when a company's debt is risky, start downgrading Enron toward junk status. A last-ditch merger with a rival company, Dynegy, gets negotiated as a lifeline and then falls apart within weeks. The stock, which had traded above $30 just that October, is now in free fall. By the end of November, shares that once sat near $90 are trading for pennies. The company Fortune magazine called untouchable for 6 straight years has, in a matter of weeks, become almost completely worthless. December 2nd, 2001, Enron officially files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. With $63.4 billion in assets, it becomes the largest bankruptcy filing in American history up to that point. Remember the open loop from the very beginning of this story? How does a company worth tens of billions of dollars just quietly disappear? Here's your full answer. It disappears because the profits were never as real as the balance sheet claimed. Once mark-to-market accounting stopped hiding the losses, and once the special purpose entities stopped absorbing the debt, there was nothing left underneath the number on the stock ticker. $90 a share had been resting on a foundation that was mostly paper. But the number on a stock ticker isn't just an abstraction. For thousands of ordinary Enron employees, it was their retirement. Enron's 401k plan was heavily weighted in company stock, and during a critical stretch that fall, employees were locked out of making changes to their accounts entirely, unable to sell even as the price collapsed around them. People who had spent decades carefully building a retirement fund watched it evaporate in weeks, powerless to move a single dollar. Meanwhile, in the year leading up to the collapse, Kenneth Lay had personally sold around $70 million of his own Enron stock. He did this while telling employees the company was fundamentally sound, while encouraging them to buy more shares, while their own retirement money sat frozen and exposed. You can decide what to call that gap between his actions and his public words. But the math is simple. The people with the least information and the least power lost the most. The people closest to the truth got out first. That deep imbalance is the real lasting cost of this entire story. Here's what happened to the people who built this. Andrew Fastow pleaded guilty to fraud charges, forfeited millions in illegal fees, and served just over 5 years in prison. Jeffrey Skilling was convicted on 19 counts, sentenced originally to 24 years, later reduced to 14 after years of appeals, and released in 2019. Kenneth Lay was convicted on every count against him, but died of a heart attack before he was ever sentenced. Arthur Andersen, the accounting firm that had audited Enron's books for years and failed to catch what was happening, lost its license to practice public accounting. A firm that once employed tens of thousands effectively ceased to exist. And out of the wreckage came something lasting, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, a set of federal rules that reshaped how public companies report their finances, specifically to make this kind of hidden debt far harder to pull off again. So, here's what you're left with. Not a story about one villain, but a system where enough smart, ambitious people looked at a fiction and decided it was easier to keep believing it than to ask the hard question out loud. What would you have done sitting in that trading floor in 2000? Tell me in the comments. And if stories like this, real companies, real collapses, are your thing, there's more where this came from.